Okay, well,
Okay, so good afternoon again. I have to repeat everything I said since we won't lie to what I remember and can duplicate what I just said. But good afternoon and welcome. Those of you who are joining us online, it's always a pleasure to have our tenants and others from the general public join us. I was mentioning that this is our first hybrid meeting since I assumed the chairpersonship of this committee. And it's good to see some of my colleagues here in the boardroom. We've got, of course, our esteemed staff, and we have Linda from the board as well as Brenda. And on the virtual screen, we have Lawrence, Maureen, as well as and Andrea. So welcome everyone, and thanks for coming in. We've got a very full agenda. Focusing on the budget, we'll have a bit of a discussion on the tenant experience survey. We'll have our report from our committee chair on the tenant engagement committee and the finance and audit committee. We'll then move into closed session to chat a bit about our budget process, and then we will move back into the public realm to approve the items that were discussed that need approval from the closed session. With that, I will move to agenda item number 2, which is the land and African ancestral acknowledgement. Toronto Seniors Housing acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. In addition, Toronto Seniors Housing acknowledges all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past. And those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. We will now proceed to item number 3, which is the approval of the public agenda. The agenda was circulated. Are there any amendments to the public meeting agenda? Brenda did ask for us to include an update on the impact of the floods that we had in the last year or so, and the CEO has agreed to deal with that as part of his update. So I don't think we need to add that item on the agenda. Hearing none, may I ask someone to move that the July 18, 2024 board public meeting agenda be approved as presented? Moved by Linda, seconded by Brenda. All in favor? That is approved. And then move to item number 4, which is conflict of interest. Is there any conflict of interest? Hearing none, we'll now move to item number 5, which is approval of the public session minutes of April the 25th and May the 2nd, 2024. The minutes were circulated as part of the agenda. Are there any amendments to the board public session minutes of April the 25th, 2024? Hearing none, may I have someone move that the minutes be adopted as correct? Moved by Brenda, seconded by Maureen. All in favor? That is approved. Are there any amendments to the board public session minutes of May the 2nd, 2024? Again, hearing none, may I ask if someone move that the public session minutes of May the 2nd, 2024 be approved as presented? Moved by Linda, seconded by Lawrence. All in favor? That is approved. Sorry, Lawrence, I preempted you there. Just want to make sure you're awake.
Nice try.
Okay, so we'll now move to item number 6, which is the action item review. Again, this list was circulated as part of the agenda. Any requests for update? Any items to be tabled for discussion?
Just a question about matters arising. I don't know where from the minutes, and not so much an amendment. For example, sorry, I don't have my in front of me, so I just wrote some notes. Page 13 on our list. talking about the EDI survey that we did with the staff, and then we said something here about possibly tracking it, how will it be done? And also the possibility of conducting an EDI survey with the board. So I just want to know if there's any follow-up on that. It can be dealt with later, if that's an appropriate spot.
It's not how we deal with it. Let's move to the adoption of the closed
Yeah,
meeting.
that's fine.
See,
Yeah.
thanks. All right, so we'll now go to the approval of the board closed session minutes of April 25th. Again, these were circulated as part of the agenda. Are there any corrections, additions, amendments, deletions? Seeing none, may I have someone move that the minutes be adopted as correct? Moved by Jim, seconded by Brenda. All in favor? That is approved. Are there any amendments to the board closed session minutes of May 2nd, 2024? Seeing none, again, can I have someone move that the minutes be adopted as presented? Moved by Jim, seconded by Maureen. All in favor? That is approved. All righty, so let's move to the action items review. Brenda, I don't know if you want to deal with that question now.
I'm happy. I just wanted to know if there was any update. Will we be tracking the EDI results? Will we also be conducting the survey with the staff? With the board. Sorry, with the board, thank you. Yeah. Want to be consistent. And in addition to that, I have raised this before, the anti-racist training. For, I think the board members should be required to attend. So we're asking staff to do this, and they've been wonderful turnout. It's unusual. This is real.
I agree.
Yeah.
So through the chair, so in regards to the second part of your question, I did receive the cable training. That's the one that you attended.
Yes.
And so we are looking to amend the training for the board.
Okay.
And based on our chair's expertise, I have the deck to then review and modify so that it's suitable for the board. So we
Will
will
it be any different than what the staff had?
It may be,
Full
we're
day?
gonna enhance,
Or are you looking at reduced hours?
reduced hours, yeah.
Okay.
So, and also reduced hours for the staff as well.
Can you folks hear us on the line?
Sorry, yes, no, sorry. So with respect to the CABR training, so the Confronting Anti-Black Racism training, which is what Brenda is referring to. We do offer the training to all new employees. We are working with the trainer or the facilitator to amend the training, one for staff, and then one to amend it so that we can deliver it to all the board members. We are looking at around a 2-hour window, so taking the most critical components of the training and then
2 hours.
delivering it. It can be dependent, so
Yeah.
yeah. So we're looking at half day for the training.
But that's not 2 hours.
No,
I would say personally, anything less than 4 hours, I would just dismiss it being ineffectual and just performative. We either believe this stuff or we don't. We're asking our staff to do this. I don't see why we shouldn't. And frankly, I think that the day is suitable even for us. But anything less than 4 hours, in my opinion, I would suggest that could be supported.
So I'll take the feedback, but I'm going to be reviewing it. There's a couple of things with the training through the chair, if I'm allowed. Because we have the EDI survey results, we will be customizing the training to TSHC. Right now, much of the training is based on information with TSHC. So we're looking at incorporating that EDI data that we derived from the survey. And then we are looking at half day. I took the training. I think there are some opportunities, but I'm going to work with the trainer and then I'm going to vet it. And then we'll go from there and determine.
And it would be vetted with the management team or who we vetted with?
So I'll be vetting it through the leadership team, but I'll also be working to share the document with Fareed so he can review as well. And then we'll exactly know how we want to deliver the training.
Yeah, I mean, I fully sort of endorse Brenda's view about this. I think it's important for us to sort of be at the same level as staff. And if we're asking staff to do this training, we should also be as committed. because there's a lot of stuff in there that I think we need to understand as well.
Yeah.
So Brenda, once I get the material from Carol, I'll sort of work with you and make sure that we've got some consensus on the amount of time we're going to spend on this, so that we're going to give it our eyes wide open. So you and I can have that conversation.
Thank you, Dan.
And did I answer the first part of your question? Sorry.
It was something about
Just
tracking,
yeah, with the board.
and also with the, I think the staff, there was some, I'm just going by the notes from the minutes and stuff, and, so will there be some tracking of some sort?
Sorry for this training.
Yeah, well, also, I'm sorry, I don't have it.
That's great, also, just to the chair.
Yes,
So I do think the work is still, with the survey that was done by the
right.
consultant, I mean, there's still work just for us to map out what the action plan is going to be.
Yes.
Even before we start to report back around
Yes.
the metrics and the evaluation, so that's like a stay tuned on that one.
Okay.
That we're still moving out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, as long as we
No,
understand
absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, sorry.
evidence-based.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on the action item list?
If you don't count it.
Our
it doesn't
colleagues
count.
on the screen? Okay, seeing none, I think we'll move on to CEO update, item number 8. So Tom,
Yes, through the
over to you.
through the chair to the board, and I will just start, I guess it's at the front of many of our minds was the recent flooding that occurred, the huge torrential rains and subsequently flooding that occurred in Toronto. And, you know, from a Toronto seniors housing perspective, I am, you know, pleased and relieved to report that we had no adverse events in any of our 83 buildings. I was just saying, if I was at City Housing Hamilton, it would have been very different. With those kind of floods, we had like over 1,500 townhouses in that portfolio. It was quite different. So, and the only, and I also would just like to share with the board that we do receive a fan out from TSHC around any kind of critical or responses that are required. And most recently, that will be extended to all staff, which I think is really important so that we can be aware. And even from the perspective that, the flooding was evident, but then, staff having to be able to look at, how they will move and how they will get it. But we did have a lot of staff who were very late kind of getting home that evening because of the transit backup, but it was fortunate that we had no adverse.
So no flooded basements, wow.
Not that was reported, no. So I looked to the director of operations, so
Wow.
that's.
Wonderful.
Then just moving on to some other items, just want to also share with the board that recently the city housing secretary brought forward a significant report to city council in June that was entitled Launching the Rental Housing Supply Program. And that was to address the current urgent crisis for affordable and supportive housing in Toronto. And it really did have a unit, like a build perspective. And it addressed the city's approach to building roughly 6,000 new rent control, but primarily rent geared to income housing through not-for-profits, through TSHC, through organizations to help those 6,000 would help meet that overall target of 65,000. There's not, there really isn't anything in it for Toronto seniors housing from a kind of tenancy management perspective, but I do think that we can provide the link if you are interested in just reading how the city is going to take this approach. But it also in June, there was a complimentary report on the community housing sector modernization and growth sector. And that had a bit more of an angle on protecting the existing stock and also supporting expansion of housing and improving access to housing. And I'm looking at that report, and we will provide you the link as well. In that executive summary, it just talks more specifically about those supports that can be provided to some of the not-for-profit organizations in the city to move forward on helping to maintain their housing. And so there's roughly, in addition to the units operated by Toronto Community Housing and Toronto Seniors Housing, there are other housing providers who make up the balance of another 40,000 units providing support housing in the city. So that's just a bit of context there, but
Is that from the same housing secretary?
Yes. So the housing secretary oversees TSHC and TSHC, but then there's also the other housing providers, and that's roughly 40,000 units. Also, just wanting to remind the board, at our upcoming QTech committee meeting, we're going to have two presentations by the Toronto Community Crisis Service and the City Denise Andre Campbell, who is leading the review of the CSU, the Community Safety Unit. And so I would just encourage the board members to attend this presentation. Denise is leading both of that work, and so it'd be good to hear from her. And then if you have any kind of questions, it'll be a very good opportunity. Just a reminder for the board members to complete their cybersecurity training. There's still a few. Oh, there's one guilty person. But yeah, this is hugely important.
Yeah.
We are being audited on this, and we have been and will in the future. And it is a important action about preventing a cyber attack. And also just mentioning that the team staff here are following up on several of the board governance, people and culture policies. With the last corporate governance HR committee, which will be returning to the board, but I just noting here that there will be a bit more of an update on that today, so I won't spend any more time on that. And just wanting to share as it relates to some of our work that's going on in the community with potential partners and some potential research projects. One is with Women's College is partnering with the North, the normally occurring retirement communities, trying to take a study for the next 4 years. And two of our buildings, 2835 Lakeshore and 865 Kingston Road. Shouldn't it be 828? Look at that, I even know the addresses. They've been chosen to participate in the study, and it's focusing on creating healthy cities and re-imaging what it is to age at home and with congregate settings. So it will be very helpful to our work and certainly, bringing some kind of innovation to seniors.
And those are our two buildings, right?
Two of our buildings, yes.
Okay.
And then also U of T, there's a capstone study opportunity where we have submitted a project for them to help us put in place a volunteer management and recognition program. And we will know a little later in the summer if our project has been selected, but we're optimistic and excited about that, particularly with the increasing numbers of attendant volunteers that we have. Just a couple more items. And this also, I think, is just such good news. The City of Toronto, it's called their Connect TO project, will be working with us and other providers over the next 4 years to deliver Wi-Fi to 80 of our 83 buildings. So that's in the common spaces. So that's a start. And this year they'll be doing 20 buildings, and then over that time doing the Wi-Fi access to the common rooms in our buildings. So that's a really positive step forward. And just finally, just a bit of sad news. We learned the sudden passing of a longtime retiree of local 416 board, Ron Johnson, on July 12th. And we just, he was an individual who was very involved with the transition and really the support that was provided with that transition with the staff to Toronto Seniors overall went very well. And so just want to wish condolences to Ron's family, friends and colleagues, local 416 and staff.
If we send a gift or anything?
We will be sending a card.
Yeah, okay.
Pardon? Yes. Well, we're record out. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Tom? Thanks, Tom.
Just the capstone with U of T, that's for volunteer management?
I will ask, Arlene knows the details on that.
All right, you want to talk about it now or later?
Through the chair.
Whatever.
So it's a study, you submit the project, and I submitted one around being able to create a volunteer management, volunteer development program for Toronto seniors, given that we have this increased desire for volunteers in the organization and that over 400 people interested. So we thought it would be good to start building from that base and doing some community development work that way.
Wonderful.
Okay, any other questions for Tom?
It's okay.
Once. All right, so move to item number 9, which is the Corporate Governance and Human Resource Committee report. In the absence of Councillor Casanti, we have Councillor Designate. Brad, go ahead.
Thank you.
Don't get any great ideas.
So through the chair, Councillor Cassani did ask that I provide an update on behalf of him And you will have a representative over. I can see the representative
Yes.
actually. is actually
Ashley,
here on
I'll
the
say,
meeting
there's,
now.
where's Ash?
So Ashley is here. So a few quick highlights from our last Corporate Governance and Human Resources meeting from June the 12th. So on that agenda, the TSHC policy inventory and policy plan was presented. This included a summary of the policy inventory across several categories of policies, things like communications, governance, finance, people and culture, and facing, etc. Policy assessment, a summary of that was presented, highlighting the status and work required for each of the different policies. There were over 123 policies that were included in each inventory, along with 11 planned for retirement. And then that report also included a view of the policies that come forward to the board this year and next year. That item was followed by a specific, two specific reports on policies being brought forward for consideration and approval. A combination of the board and governance space and the people and culture space. Subsequent to that discussion, there was a recognition that an opportunity for additional input would be of value. So that has subsequently been sent out, and all board members would have received a summary following that meeting of feedback. Also at that meeting, and there's still an opportunity for feedback actually until tomorrow. We'd asked and put a deadline of tomorrow. And also at that meeting, the whistleblower protection policy was discussed and is to be referred to the Audit, Finance, and Risk Committee. These policies will all come forward to a future board meeting. And then finally, the committee did go in camera to discuss several items around some people and culture and governance related matters, which are coming forward today as well. I'll take any questions on behalf of the council.
Thank you, Grant. And just want to add, I mean, I think the policy review was an impressive piece of work, very comprehensive, lots of good discussion. And I'd encourage members to take the final look at the document that was recently circulated, and we'll have an opportunity at a subsequent meeting to have a more fulsome conversation to finalize those policies. Any questions for Grant? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the item number 10, which is an update from the Quality and Tenant Engagement Committee, and I'll ask our hardworking chair to present our report.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody. Today, we'll be speaking to our strategic directions progress update for Q1 2024, as well as Forum Research will be presenting the tenant experience survey and results. We're really excited about that. As our board chair noted, we have a deputation today, and we'll speak, and he will speak prior to the Forum Research presentation. We had our last meeting on May 29th and had a full agenda with lots of discussion, and we focused on Brad Pickett providing an overview of the operational dashboard, presenting key performance metrics on arrears, vacancies, maintenance, work orders, administrative requests, and pest management. And we're really pleased that things are moving in the right direction in many of these areas. Forum Research, who will be presenting today, also presented in great detail the tenant experience survey, and the committee had a fulsome discussion on the results and shared lots of insights, and I'm sure that we'll have a similar discussion today. Finally, Arlene updated on the Community Activities Fund and the Community Connect update, another area that is of great interest to our tenants and to our tenant committee. And I just wanted to reinforce, as Tom mentioned, that we have a great meeting coming up next week, and that we encourage everyone to come and have that and hear about the City of Toronto Community Crisis and CSU Review Project and Convene Toronto. So lots on the go, and I will pass it over to you, Fareed, for the rest of the presentations on the group.
Before we move on to the progress on the strategic directions, any questions for Linda or any comments?
The report from the crisis, what's full time community crisis? That's next week.
Yeah.
And was it community safety unit?
Yeah.
That's next week.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Well,
did
this
see
is-
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll move to item number 10. Grant, you want to go through an update on the strategic directions?
Thank you. So before through the chair, so before the board today is the strategic directions progress report for Q1 of 2024. This report was included in the Quality and Tenant Engagement Committee package as a consent item at that agenda. I'll go through some of the results here for the board, just at a summary level. And this is the regular or standard format we've been bringing board to board previously. So there's a combination of the dashboard and then a summary of the initiatives and where we are in that particular quarter. A couple of highlights on the dashboard, which is one of the attachments in the report. First quarter of 2024, the rent collection rate was 99%, which is quite high. Look at the industry comparators. Average unit turnover was 69 days. That was up a little bit, but still less than the industry of 88 days. We saw 968 units be declared as free. Housing occupancy rate was strong and slightly up at 98.25%. 68 planning meetings held in the first quarter associated with the Community Activities Fund work, including and through those meetings, 351 tenant-led activities brought forward, requested, and 326 program requests and 373 new equipment requests. So significant interest in what's coming out of the Community Activities Fund and the maintenance meetings. There are also 190 recurring programs in the first quarter. That was up 8% from the last quarter of 2023. The action plan associated with the employee survey was completed in the first quarter as well. Workshops for the IDEA strategy, which I know we were talking here, and the staff vacancy rate was just over 8%. With regards to the initiatives on the strategic directions, there were 17 initiatives that were slated in the first quarter, 12 of which were completed, and 5 were noted as in progress. And those are included in attachment 2. Some of the things completed included some work on the budget, Community Activities Fund that I just referenced, the policy management framework, the employee EDI survey, implementation on Community Connect Plus, executive compensation policy, and a few other things. So there are a number of things moving forward, and we'll continue to report progress on that. The Q2 next for QT, not at the meeting next week, but at the subsequent meeting. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Go ahead, Brenda.
Just had a question about the access to services objective there. Under recurring programs?
Yeah.
Service provider led versus tenant. What do you mean by service provider? These are like outside folks, like an agency or a community organization?
So through the chair, and I think if it's okay, I'll ask Arlene to speak to this because it is an item in her area, but I think you're on to what it means.
That's fine.
Okay, so I know, and obviously right now, there's a larger number of service provider led versus tenant. So do we have a objective, a formula, a level at which we want more tenant led, less, like what, is there some sense of what we're aiming towards?
Through the chair, right now, there's no objective around rationalizing those resources. We're trying to actually put in place better reporting
Yeah,
and better information coming from the service provider so that we can then get to a place where we can say we might need more of this and less of that. And what we are finding though is through the annual billing planning meeting that we had earlier in the year, we had quite a number of requests for more programs. But the majority of the programs were programs where tenants were seeking to add personal capacity. So we may see in time, so they wanted their own skills development.
oh, yes,
They wanted to be able to do things on their
Yes.
own, know how to find things. They didn't want to have things found for them
Yes.
necessarily. So as we put in place those kinds of capacity building programs, we may see less of these agency-led programs, but we won't know that to be true until we hear it.
so who directs the service providers? I mean, you know, you can still have other people running your programs as long as you're able to dictate and control and have accountability on those programs. So who directs the service providers? Is it just an historical legacy that just will come back? Or are there, is there somewhere within our management team that, and a partnership team that talks to the service? Or is it the tenants that are sitting and discussing with the service provider?
So this is the oversight piece, right? So,
Yes, yes, through the chair, to Brenda. So there, that is, you really kind of hit an area where there needs to be focus, and we are doing focus
Yeah.
work. So
Good.
just taking a step back, there are services that are currently being delivered. But we need to update to our example, these agreements that are in place.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, there's very little ability
That's right.
for us to kind of measure. However, we do have to be careful around this term of kind of
I
oversight
understand.
or kind of control or direction to those community services. Because once again, we don't want to go into the fray
Yeah.
of kind of the RHRA, the Retirement Home Regulatory Act. So
What does that mean? Don't want to lose.
You don't want to become a
we
retiree.
don't want to become a retirement home. And so
How would we?
if you offer two or more services that are indirect services in your building, you can be considered a retire.
Wow.
We're gonna bring more to the,
it's a
That's fine.
delegated authority.
we're going to bring more to the board on that in September. But I
Okay.
just want to finish to your question,
Yes.
that we are working on solidifying the agreements with the service providers. And then at that point, where can we kind of enhance? Where do we maybe want to go
Right.
back? So that's where we're on.
Could you report back, if it's your September, I'm not certain what meeting, could you report back as to exactly what you're asking of the service providers?
Within the agreement?
Well, just,
For sure.
accountability is important, and that's been the problem, right? And there's nothing wrong with running services, it's just this issue of accountability and who they're sensitive to. And further to that point I had a question, and it's not answerable right now, I understand, but the healthcare component. I wondered whether there was, this is part of my questioning about whether there's a standard or format. Are we hoping to see some sort of level of healthcare in each building? In which case, are we working towards that and?
Yeah.
I mean, I know we have some partnerships with Bakers, but even something as simple as a local doctor, my sister's building has a local doctor who comes in every month, as an example. That's not through any interagency coordination, it's just local doctor, and there's a family healthcare team down the street that they also relate to. So, I just think if we start having
Absolutely.
a vision of personal development, social recreational, and healthcare. Healthcare is the key one because that's the one that often debilitates people and make them unable to participate or get into problems with the career. So I just want to make sure we have that on here. Okay, so September, okay.
Right.
All right, thank you. I wait then.
Any other questions before we move on? All right, thanks, Linda, thanks.
Are we speaking loud enough?
So before we get to the presentation of the tenant experience survey, I'm going to invite our deputant, Bill. I see you're on the line. So I'll invite Bill Oman to depute. Bill, can you hear me?
Yes.
Go
Thank you.
ahead, Bill.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Farid and Mr. Hunter and members of the board. Wonderful conversation I was just listening to, and it's exactly to the point of where many of my arguments and concerns come from. You received a written deputation that I sent to the executive committee the other day, and you can see in there that first of all, I have nothing but respect for the efforts that have been made so far by staff. I think they are stellar. There are sticking points, and many of those revolve around definitions of things, or maybe how something is interpreted. And I believe that, in my mind, because I've been involved with this so long, some of the issues that we are facing right now, I think stem from some of the decisions that were made early on, while the integrated service model concept was being built. And that has results that we're kind of facing now. And I don't need to go into those, too much, other than to say that, from the beginning as a stack member, I've had concerns about transparency and accountability to tenants. And I think that this is something that really needs to be, looked at a little more thoroughly, especially at this early stage before we get too far along, and then we decide that that's not acceptable. But everybody's been trained to see things from a certain perspective. But beyond that, I think we were talking about what is it we're trying to accomplish here, and what I put down as for what I've done as a stack member. These are the kinds of things that I believe that you were referring to, and the kinds of things. It's just the model of what I think would be beneficial in buildings. And this is based on our experience being part of pilots with Baycrest Hospital and the interprofessional care teams. So we have been bringing and working on bringing these supports into the building to serve the tenants that need. And we've also been working with agencies to bring in the recreational services and the exercise program. And through that, we are starting to, we've been building our volunteer base, and we've just, as I'm pulling back from my direct involvement, I'm now starting to see a group of a half a dozen tenants who are starting to take the lead and starting to organize some events on their own. So I think this is where we want to, where we want to head. But I'm aware that that there's more than half of the buildings have very little or nothing, so we're just kind of putting out what we're doing here as a model and as a learning experience that that items can be beneficial and helpful in other buildings. And I think that we need to keep in mind that there are a few buildings like mine and some other buildings, like some of the stack members who have been very engaged and involved. We need to be supported in our efforts to continue to engage. And I think one of the ideas we have here about a round table, I think is something that is worth further consideration and exploration, because it helps to bring the agencies, the healthcare component, staff, and tenants together, where they can find those common grounds and support the effort of each other. So that's about all I really have to say. And so thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Bill. And as usual, I think those were noteworthy comments. I mean, I particularly like the collaboration piece and the horizontality and bringing people around the table to sort of talk through some of these issues. I also think that some of our communication pieces might be able to do this if we are able to share experiences and highlight some of this in our newsletter that comes out. That might also be an opportunity to get information out. I know, Linda, you've got a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a comment. Just thank you, Bill, for your ongoing commitment. And you have actually been a model in terms of actually what community engagement looks like at a tenant level. And I do think that this is actually going to be a theme for the next couple of meetings for our tenant engagement. I think it's complex work actually figuring out. But I think that we can learn from people like you, and I really appreciate your ongoing support, and hopefully we'll see more and more of those buildings where there isn't much happening, where there's a lot of both community based. And I think we're going to hear about that today in our for sure we're going to hear about that with the tenant survey, because it's the area, the one area really so we're all on the same page that this is the area that we've got to continue to develop. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Brandon.
Just a suggestion, in addition to looking at options and partnerships, could we consider talking to Parks and Recreation about providing staff and or grants to deliver services in the building? I say this because in my previous hats I worn, I was able to arrange they gave me one of their staff as well as funding to hire a staff off-site. So they do have the capacity to deliver programs, not just in the Parks and Recreation building. So it's not inconceivable that they couldn't, in areas particularly that are close to Parks and Rec buildings, they could come in and do recreational, and that is very broad. Their definition of rec is very, very broad. It include, seniors, fitness and yoga and all that stuff. So they also just have to spread the dollars, because that's a publicly funded service that should be available to all. I know that seniors aren't all that active, depending on the community centers and depending on where part of the city you're in. Some are better than others in engaging centers.
So maybe we'll ask staff to take a look at that and come back to the
Yeah.
board. Yeah, I mean,
I just wanted to comment and to thank Bill, because through our regional meetings that we've been holding, so 12 last year and holding 12 this year, we are also sharing stories like Bill's across all the regions. As part of our regional format, we have this sharing time where they talk about the advancements that they're making in their own building.
Right.
And it gives them a time to share ideas across buildings and build relationships across buildings so that they can learn and share from each other. So, and Bill has been very instrumental in sharing at our last meeting, the work that he's doing at Saranac and sharing tools of that nature. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Bill.
okay, great. Once
Sorry,
again,
just one last thing. New Horizons funding. Because New Horizons think we applied for. Okay, for social recreational and then the senior center, federal money.
okay, great. Anything else from our colleagues online? Any questions for Bill? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. And so I'll ask Vince, I guess. Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. So, most important item on the agenda. That's probably why. Okay, so we'll move to a presentation on tenant experience survey. So I'll invite our colleagues from Winsome Stack to present. I don't know, you want to set this up, Brian, for our meeting?
Yeah, so I can say
Okay.
a couple of introductory remarks.
Go ahead.
Sure. Through the chair, thank you. Thanks. So as the board is aware, we've worked through a process to do the tenant experience survey. Presentation and materials that are included in the package today were brought forward to Quality of Tenant Engagement Committee, and as Linda as well. Very quickly, we'll get to the presentation to allow opportunity for questions afterwards. I'll just let the board know that as part of the report that's before you, there is the full survey report. It's a long document that has the complete survey results. That's the first attachment. The second is the actual survey itself that is distributed to tenants. And then the third attachment is the presentation that Winsome Stack, who's on the screen virtually, is going to deliver. Winsome is with Forum Research, and she'll be delivering a presentation to us to go over in a consolidated summary view of the results, because it is a long and detailed report. I just want to say that since we went to Quality and Tenant Engagement Committee, we've also been working through the development of an action plan. So also with us today is Ayushman Banerjee. He's a business consultant within the Strategy and Policy TSHC team, who's helping us work through the action planning activities. And that's a piece of work that's in progress right now. There have been discussions at the extended leadership team already. The survey results have been shared with the staff, and we are also going to be sharing them in more detail with tenants. Without further ado, though, I'm going to turn it over now to Lynn to walk through this presentation. And if, at the conclusion of this, and she is going to do this fairly expeditiously, I know, there'll be an opportunity for questions. Just before, we did actually take some of this to Stack as well prior to going to Quality and Tenant Engagement Committee, and got a little bit of feedback on how to communicate this with tenants and some feedback on the priorities which were in alignment with what's in the survey.
Thank you so much, Grant, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for having me here today. I'm very excited to present you with your 2023-2024 tenant survey findings. As Grant mentioned, there is that full, larger, comprehensive report available to you. The purpose of this is just, I know I only have 15-20 minutes max to get through all this content, so I'm going to be rapid firing, but with that said, let's get started. Okay. So this presentation is broken up into two parts. First, we're going to do a quick overview on how we developed the questionnaire and the methodological approach to collecting the data. And then second, we're actually going to get into your high-level snapshot results. Okay, so how did we develop the questionnaire? So we know in 2021, before Toronto Seniors Housing was its own entity, there was a similar survey fielded to 18 buildings in the Southeast and the Northeast regions. So what we did was use that questionnaire as a first reference for survey development. We made adjustments to it by referencing your current KPIs to help inform the new questionnaire, and also consulted with Toronto Senior Housing staff. We conducted 2 focus groups with tenants just to really make sure that before we fielded the survey to get their feedback, it was clear, straightforward, and all-encompassing from their perspective. In terms of question types, the majority of questions ask tenants to provide their feedback on this 5-point scale you see here on the screen, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. There is also some yes/no type questions and an open-ended question of the presentation, just to ensure that any final thoughts and improvement areas were captured appropriately. So how did we go about collecting data? Well, this past winter, we mailed out physical copies of the survey to each household in all of your 83 buildings with 3 types of instructions. 1, how to fill out and mail back the completed survey, instructions on how to complete the survey online, or if they wanted to, they could call in to do the survey over the phone. And you can see the distribution of survey completes by mode on the table right of the screen, with mail being obviously the most popular. We also made the survey, we made sure that it was available in 13 languages, just to make sure that language was not a barrier to participation and gaining feedback. And when all was said and done, we received a 24% response rate, which was above our target of 20%, which provides us with a lot of rich data and a representative sample of your population. And with this 24% response rate, that gives us a margin of error of plus or minus 2%. Okay, so with the questionnaire development and methodology behind us, let's dive into some high-level results. As a reminder, just a snapshot. There's a lot more to it, but here are the key findings. So a couple of things too I want to mention before we move on. The majority of the results are presented with what is called frequency analysis, which just means the distributions of responses within your survey data. So for example, how much they agreed or disagreed with any statement on that 5-point scale we saw earlier. And that kind of gives you an idea. If you're scoring high, it's an area of satisfaction. If there's more scores in the dissatisfaction, maybe an area of concern. And generally, like we use kind of 80%, like this is up to interpretation, of course, but if you see scores of 80% or more, thumbs up. 60 to 80%, okay. Anything below 60%, maybe focus your attentions on that. Okay, so in terms of the big picture, here are a few positive findings from tenants. So the majority, or 80%, felt happy with Toronto Senior Housing Services overall. 82% say that they're proud to be a tenant at Toronto Senior Housing, and 83% feel safe in their home. And almost 9 in 10, 87%, feel that the staff treat them with respect. So these are things you're doing really well on. On this slide, we're just going to be going over what I just said again, but differently. I want to give you some context, so how you interpret the report on your own time. So drawing your attention to the first bar of data here, this is the distribution of responses for all buildings. So that's your total metric here. While the data below the dotted line, that shows you the nuances of how each regional group of buildings responded, just to give you an idea of what's driving that total score up or pulling it down between the buildings. The top 2 score you see on the right side, it simply nets the scores of agree and strongly agree to give you an idea of net agreement with that statement. So as just mentioned on the previous slide, 80% of tenants agree that they are happy with the services that you provide. So this question is asking whether or not they are proud to be a tenant at Toronto Senior Housing. This is new this year and was suggested during one of the consultations with tenants, and we found that 82% they agreed with this statement. In terms of feeling safe in their home or their unit, 83% agreed that they do feel safe. So in terms of respect, what we see here, 87%. Okay, so it wouldn't be a complete look at the big picture without looking at some opportunities for improvement, specifically areas where satisfaction or agreement levels, they just weren't as high as some of the other ones we saw. So for example, in access to supports, we found that tenants could benefit from more help to access the services they needed. Only about 61% agreed with that statement. For property management, tenants are largely happy with the cleanliness and maintenance of their buildings. That was around 86%, but less so when it comes to their building being kept up to date, when it comes to them being kept up on building maintenance and repairs. That was only about 66% saying that they're satisfied with that. So about 65% of your tenants had received pest treatment, and of those, about 6 in 10 felt that they received enough help getting ready for pest treatment, and the same proportion were satisfied with the outcome of the pest treatment. So things to keep in mind there. And then in terms of community participation, just over half felt a sense of community in their building, and we'll see shortly in the coming slides just how important this metric is. Okay, on to the drivers analysis. So what this is, we wanted to really understand which areas and actions make a real difference to tenants' overall level of satisfaction. So in order to do that, we do what's called a regression analysis. We did this overall and for each region, and I'm just going to be going over the overall right now. The results of the regression, so what this tells us, it places all your services in this colorful 4-quadrant type box that you see on the screen, which shows the difference between how satisfied they are with each item and the impact that that item has on their overall satisfaction. So let's look at that on the next slide. There's a lot to unpack here, but let's start with those top 2 satisfaction scores. So those are plotted vertically on the y-axis. So they're stated top 2 satisfaction scores for all the service statements you see on the screen here are plotted there. Now there's this impact score on overall satisfaction, aka the drivers. So those are plotted horizontally on the x-axis. And what this does, it describes how important each item is in relation to their overall satisfaction, which was identified by the statistical regression model. So for example, looking at the green box in the top right, these are primary areas for continuity, meaning these services have relatively high impact or high impact on overall satisfaction and high individual satisfaction scores. So that's why they're up in this top right box. So what you want to do here is continue the current level of service to maintain these high satisfaction levels, because these items are important to their overall satisfaction. Okay. Looking at the red box below, these are the services that have the highest impact on overall satisfaction, but with lower individual satisfaction scores, meaning if you can focus your efforts on these areas and raise satisfaction levels on these items, then they're going to have the most impact on the tenant's overall satisfaction. So taking comfortable sharing concerns and making complaints to TSHC. Taking that metric, the top 2 satisfaction score was actually close to 80%, which may not seem low on its own, right? But the model identifies that this is a low satisfaction score in comparison to the others, okay? So it's also important to focus efforts on enhancing program offerings at buildings, since this has the lowest satisfaction score and the highest impact on overall satisfaction. And similarly, making sure tenants have information to access the services that they need and ensuring staff take accountability for their work. Those are also important areas to focus on. But, you know, because most agencies, you can't take action on every single item or every single area of satisfaction. So just looking at the top 2 scores that we have on the other slides, that may not be the best way of identifying what needs prioritizing. So that's why we run this separate analysis, so you can see in these boxes what takes priority, meaning, or like what you should be looking at is the red box of primary areas for improvement. The boxes to the left, they're secondary areas of focus. Not to say they're not important or shouldn't be considered, but the blue box represents services you're doing well on, but they don't really impact overall satisfaction that much. And similarly, the yellow boxes, they have relatively lower levels of satisfaction, but they also don't impact overall satisfaction that much. So again, blue and yellow, things to consider, but they're secondary points of focus compared to the primary areas. Okay, this slide just reiterates what I just talked about, and I spent enough time on that, so let's keep going. Demographics. So you have an obviously diverse group of seniors. So what demographic profile did we find for those who completed the survey? Quick note on this too, even though like the whole survey was voluntary, like if you were to fill it out, we can't control who fills out what on the survey. We specifically mentioned in the demographics section that every single question is voluntary. So and you'll see the distribution of those who decided to or not to respond to a certain question. Okay, I'm going to go through these quickly. So in terms of age, the bulk of your respondents, 72%, they are between the ages of 65 and 84 years old. 42% have lived in Toronto senior housing for more than 10 years. English is the most popular language tenants prefer to speak at 57%, followed by 14% a variety of Chinese dialects. 60% of tenants identified as women, 32% identified as man. 64% describe their sexual orientation as heterosexual or straight. There's some other types of sexual orientations mentioned, along with 30% preferring not to answer this question. About 8 in 10 were not born in Canada. However, 88% of your tenants have lived in Canada for more than 10 years. 28% identified as white, 21% identified as East Asian, 10% identified as Black. And it's important also to note that this was a multi-select question, so tenants could self-describe themselves as one or multiple races. Lastly, 51% of tenants reported having one or more disability. And again, this was another multi-select, 24% of those who reported having a disability had some sort of comorbidity, while 32% said that they did not have any disabilities. And the most common types of disabilities surround physical illness or pain and mobility types of disabilities. Okay, so now, what do we do with this demographic data we collected? Why did we even do it in the first place? Well, we can now segment tenants to see if certain demographic groups are more or less likely to respond in a certain way to a question. So let's dive into that. In terms of overall satisfaction with living at Toronto Senior Housing, we found that those born outside of Canada and those who prefer to speak a language other than English, they were the most satisfied overall. The groups that were especially proud to live at Toronto Senior Housing were Black tenants, those born outside of Canada again, and people who prefer to speak a language other than English. Language preference doesn't seem to have an impact on the tenant's ability to understand their lease responsibilities and rights, nor does it impact their ability to receive updates about necessary work going on in their building. However, they still do show a preference to receive information in their preferred language, even if they can understand English. We found that Black tenants also felt more positively about the cleanliness of their building, and they felt safest in common spaces. East Asians, overall, they tended to be less satisfied with a lot of items like pride, sense of community, building maintenance, while white tenants, they were more likely to be satisfied with the maintenance that you do on the buildings. Women, they were more concerned about building cleanliness and felt less safe in their home, but there wasn't a difference between men and women on perceptions of safety in common spaces. And while those with disabilities tended to find their units and buildings less accessible, the vast majority, 90%, they still consider their homes to be nevertheless accessible. So. Okay, qualitative findings. Remember earlier how I mentioned we asked an open-ended question at the end of the survey, and the purpose of that was to really hear from tenants in their own words and provide tenants with a chance to state their nuanced perspectives and experiences. So let's get into those. So the question, the open-ended question that was asked was, please share with us any other thoughts that you have that could make Toronto senior housing better for tenants like you. And while about 60% had nothing to say, of those who did, they averaged just over 2 suggestions per person. And notably, they weren't always areas of improvement. Sometimes you receive some positive accolades like, I appreciate the staff. Thank you so much for everything. I'm very happy with where I live. So kudos. Okay, so how did we go about understanding the written comments? If we just gave you pages and pages of verbatims, what are you going to do with that information? What Form did, we have a team that reviews all comments and groups them into themes or categories that we can see here on the slides. So the top ones in terms of suggestions for improvement are around staff and management, property management, and safety and security. Again, the full detailed report, it pulls out some of these verbatims to give you more understanding of the specific feedback related to each of these metrics, but this is a good at a snapshot glance. Okay, last section, I promise I am almost done. So as mentioned earlier, we had that similar survey conducted in 2021, but it was to a subset of the Southeast and Northeast buildings. I think it was 15 in the Southeast and 3 in the Northeast. So what we did, the slide that I'm about to show you, we specifically isolated those buildings in order to have more truly comparative data between 2021 and this past winter. So let's look at those. Okay. As you can see, results between surveys, they're generally similar. What was performing well then is still performing well now, and what needed attention then still needs attention now. So for example, their overall satisfaction with services remains high. They still think staff treat them with respect, and they still think the building is well maintained. However, they still want the building to offer more programming, and they don't feel so much of a strong sense of community within their building. And we saw earlier that program offerings, it's a primary area for improvement in the key drivers, right? Which is something highly correlated with their sense of belonging in the building. So, you know, we have a little bit of trending data here. And now with this more comprehensive survey that we're asking to all buildings, this really gives you a benchmark for future surveys that you do, so you can track your performance, if you're making changes, how are these changes being implemented, what is tenant feedback over the years, so you can continuously do this, reevaluate and see what, you know, year over year, what your tenants are looking for and how your performance metrics change. And now if you have questions, I'm all ears.
Great, great presentation. Good synopsis. I think you touched all the high points. I've got a few questions, but I'll allow my colleagues to go ahead before I ask my questions. I'm going to go to the screen. Any questions, Lawrence or Jim?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah. I have a comment actually. Any survey to be meaningful, the responses received should represent all sections of the population. Another one is the completion rate of responses also matters. There are 3,223 responses received. Now, all of them may not be complete. The completion rate could be lower. So for future surveys, we should strive to improve these rates. Thank you.
Okay.
If I could
Yeah.
just comment on that really quickly, yes, completion rate does matter. And how the online and telephone surveys were set up, you couldn't move past a question without answering it, except for the demographics section, because we wanted to ensure fullness. But in the mail survey, what we did find is that of the surveys that we sent back, we wanted to make sure that, at least 50% of it, aside from the demographics, was filled out in order to ensure that we have enough usable data. And the majority of the surveys that came back were filled out in their entirety, right? So it just goes to show how involved your tenants are and how they want to have their voices heard and want to give you feedback on the questions that you're asking them.
Okay,
So
let's,
thank you, Lawrence.
Jim, any, Maureen? Okay,
Well, I think Maureen's trying.
Maureen, you're muted. See, I can see your lips moving, but.
I just wanted to say I don't have any questions at
Okay.
this time.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thanks, Winsome. Good presentation.
Thank you,
Great.
Maureen.
Okay, Linda or Brent?
Yeah, we had a large conversation at the, at our committee meeting. I think that the pieces that, is really emphasized is actually the areas. It's quite interesting that things haven't actually moved from the last survey.
Yeah.
And that for me, the work, it's kind of nice. It's a nice affirmation that what we need to be focusing on is community engagement, and program, and how to help people to connect with services and maintain those high drivers that are actually really important in terms of the property and safety. I think Maureen and Jim and a few of us were pleasantly surprised with the results, because we sometimes don't see that, but looking at that.
That's great, thanks. Brenda?
No, because I've asked a lot of questions.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think the point that Linda made is the one that I was going to make as well, which is a trend piece, because that's what I was looking at, is to say, how are we doing relative to the last survey? And I think you've done a great job with kind of isolate the buildings that were surveyed the last time around. So we're comparing apples to apples. So that's great. The one question I have though is, do we have, and this is perhaps more question for you, Wayne, is do you have any data or how we might compare nationally or internationally?
It's a great point, yes.
Like, for example, even if it's TCHC,
Yep. So yeah, TCHC, we run annual surveys with them also. If they are willing to share results, then I can kind of do some comparative analysis of the questions and provide you with those answers. But you have to keep in mind too, I think the last survey we did with them was done in a different point in time. It might have been early 2023. So you always have to take any comparative metrics with a grain of salt, because even things like seasonality can affect how people feel, right? Like this was done in the winter. Had you fielded it in the summer, or when people are generally more active and doing things, would they have a different view? So yes, we do have comparable data that is directly related to you. And if I'm allowed to, I will share that.
All right, yeah, I'm just curious. I think it's not imperative. And the other, I don't need a response because now we're sort of trying to move ahead here. When I look at the driver's analysis and look at those 4 quadrants, the one that I'm trying to reconcile in my own mind is the lower right-hand corner, which is it's the high impact, low satisfaction. And there's a clustering of a whole bunch of services in there. When you look at the earlier presentation, it shows that for some of those services, it's like 80%. So I'm trying to kind of reconcile in my own mind how that happened, whether it was an anomaly or something that, I guess I don't know what the explanation is. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, and it is because most of your services did score high overall. The middle points that divide the quadrants, those are the means for the scores on both impact on overall satisfaction and the top 2 kind of mean scores. So that's how it gets divided. So even though your scores are high in their top 2 cents, when you throw them all into this regression model, the regression model it's like it's comparing them against each
Yeah,
other
so it's
and then
relative,
comparing.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
get it.
relative. It's hard to explain in a non-statistical way, but it is correct. I assure you. We've run it and rerun it, and that is what the data is saying.
You're taking us back to our multiple regression.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's 101.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah, we're all going back to school.
See, we
And-
need stats.
Thanks. So if there are no other questions, sorry, Brenda, go ahead.
Just one about, I'm noticing that 80% of the, I guess, survey participants, were, people born outside of Canada. Is that the phrase that was used? Yeah. 80%, yes. And, which surprised me is how high it was. So I'm just wondering, how does that compare with any other organization or across the board? I mean, in a sense, it's maybe an indicator of successful access. You know, so you're basically taking people who are relative newcomers. So what percentage were here 10 years plus, but we're able to access services. So the 80, that's pretty high. I would think. I don't know if I'm wrong in saying that it's high, but I don't know if you have any comparative experience or any comments on that.
I think also because your population is older, they could have immigrated to Canada when they were very young, right? So it could have been back
Oh, I
like
see.
it
Okay.
could have been 60
okay.
years ago, it could have been 80 years ago, and then now, but they've lived in Canada most of their life. Unfortunately, other than like lived here 10 years or more, it just lumps in everything. But they could have lived here for most of their life, and I think that kind of speaks to a lot of your tenants. They weren't necessarily born in Canada, but they immigrated at an early age.
Yeah,
Right.
but it's silly.
All right, thanks. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, even the demographic piece, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the general population that lives in Toronto, and you compare it to the amount of people who live in our building born outside of Canada, it's the only place where that rate is higher.
That's right.
Right? So I think, you know, so we can spend a lot of time talking through this, but thank you. That was a great presentation. Appreciate the information and lots for us to chew on, and I'm sure staff is fully engaged with this. And as Linda said, we need to continue to find ways of improving those 2 or 3 areas where we seem to be stagnant. Sorry, there was someone.
Jim.
Sorry, Jim. Go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to say that we had a follow-up volunteer community meeting yesterday morning, and only 3 of us showed up out of 6 that originally volunteered. And one of the things we discussed is how hard it is to get people in this building, this small building. I think there are right now around 28 tenants, to get them involved and wanting to come to the community room at all. It's been a, just to get people out there apart kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
And-
thanks again, Wade.
Yet people seem very satisfied with TSHC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not that interested in mingling with other people.
Thanks, Jim.
People deserve choice.
All righty.
Thank you for
Okay.
having me.
Thanks, appreciate it. So if there are no other questions, we'll move on to our next hardworking committee chair. Lawrence, you want to provide an update on the Finance and Audit Committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Audit, Finance and Risk Committee met on June 12th and reviewed the financial results for Q1 2024 as well as April 2024. We also received an update on the 2024 cash flow. We also reviewed the TSHC and TSHC reconciliation. Vince will be presenting the financial results next. So that concludes my report. Mr. Chair, back to you.
Thank you, sir. Vince?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Published for the April year-to-date in the fourth quarter, which as you can see in attachment 1 through April 30th, 2024, TSHC incurred operating expenses of $14,298,139 on the total revenue of $637,745 of expenses. In total excess revenue of expenses resulted in this loss of 1.662 million, including amortization expense. Really, the significant on the first 4 months really comes from three areas, three major areas. One is the reporting of the Q1 surplus from TSHC of $2.7 million. And this included 2.1 million on the revenue component and about 600,000 savings on SDA expenses, SDA service delivery agreement expenses. And on top of it, a couple of other things that are slightly higher on the salary and the benefits information that resulted in about $674,000 higher and about $103,000 in which retirement obligation booking. In terms of the overall mix, revenue wise, there is see the attachment there. It's pretty consistent. Pretty much received a significant portion of that from TSHC on the rental units revenue through the transition agreements. And on top of it as well, there was a surplus of $1.166 million. And this is a result of additional rent revenue that came through the relevant budget. And on top of it, it was extra interest income earned to the bank, to the sort of the high interest income this year. And on top of it, there is also some miscellaneous income received as well, about approximately $10,000. In terms of the total overall expenses, I mentioned earlier, $14 million of total expenses. And again, the significant portion of that is on the salaries and on the post-retirement obligation. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but on the attachment number 2, talks a bit about our cash, talks about our financial position, and here cash is about $1.535 million. There's some amount on the accounts receivable, some short-term receivable from TSHC of $7.645 million, which majority of it was resolved in May and June. This is a small component of the prepaid expenses, which consisted highly of the insurance piece, and then there's still the long-term receivable from TSHC, $1 million. That's on the post-retirement obligation report there. And on top of it, in terms of accounts payable, there's about $3.558 million that is payable, and most of those were resolved in May and June. And due to TSHC, the other offsetting entry was about $5.867 million of that, which I mentioned earlier was resolved in May and June. So the settlement of the true-up and reconciliation. There's a small amount of the City of Toronto in there, and the post-retirement obligation $6 million. So if there's any question related to the financial statements that was up April 30th, 2024.
Yeah, I just have a question on the variance on the salary side, and thinking, given the fact that we're in April, we've got another 2 quarters to go. Is there any risk there in terms of what we're seeing in trend?
Yeah, so to the chair, certainly for the first 4 months, out of the 778,000 of that, 674,000 is on the salaries, and there is a couple of components in there. One of them is a one-time payment that we made for our vacation expenses. So this is a one-time. But on the other side of it, there's also the adjustments on the merits. So that wasn't included in there, embedded in there. It's a year-to-year adjustment. There is also a small component of that includes the benefits. So at the end of last year, there's about a deficit, about $50,000 deficit. So we have to true that up with our insurance company. But back to your earlier question, will this be a significant? We expect there will be a negative variance by the end of the year. However, we anticipate that we'll get some savings through TSHC, and that will offset some of the sort of unexpected shortfalls.
So you minded some fourth quarter, second quarter expenses that are extraordinary that you wouldn't necessarily incorporate the percent here.
Right.
All right, that's just, you know, just curious, Brenda.
Hi, oh, sorry, I don't have computers. I was expecting it to be posted here. So bear with me if I'm a little inaccurate. It seems like seems like a continuing theme that our expenses are ahead of our revenues. Is that because of the granting process when we have the monthly revenue grant comes in? Do we, and, mention a $1.6 million loss in revenue and expenses. So I'm just a little confused. Do we continually run the deficit in each quarter because we know at year end we'll be picking it up with the grant, the city grant? Or is the city grant given to us throughout the year? How does it even out? Because we had a deficit last year. So does that mean it's a continual deficit we should expect until we resolve this service agreement and our working relationship agreements?
That's correct, to the chair. So as you recall, the 2024 budget had a deficit of 4.3.
Yeah.
And we continue to have sort of like higher expenses, lower revenue.
Yes.
Throughout the period. At the year end, there will be an adjustment.
Yes.
With maybe through organization.
Yes.
And therefore there will be sort of balance at the end of the period.
Right.
But from a budgeting standpoint, this is how it's been done.
Yes.
And we have some other conversations about whether or not we can offset it in the front. But typically, the process from with the city and in this case with TSHC, it is done at the end, whereby the effect of that comes through
The end of the year. Okay. And the rental revenue, does that come to us monthly or do they hold on to it and then there's always a gap or delay in receipt?
So through the chair on the revenue, we see that as we receive it. So there's no, so as soon as the money comes in,
Yeah.
that's the amount.
Okay.
So if you look at in terms of the budgeting process with TSHC, for the first 4 months of this year, the budget revenue was only $10 million. We expected to have a $3.8 million deficit. We actually came in at a deficit of almost $6 million.
Yes.
So there's actually favorability of about $2.1 million. And the majority of that came from revenue. And the process that we did with 2023 and 2024 budget with TSHC was due to the fact that this budgeting was done through TSHC.
Yes.
So in 2025, one of the things that we will make more correct is that the revenue portion will be allocated much more to what our portfolio looks like. Just to give you a bit of context, last year in the budget of 2024, the revenue increase was only 1%.
The revenue?
The revenue on the rent
Yes.
was only increased by 1%. We know that based on more stable income and pension,
Yeah.
it's typically between 2 and 3% increase. So
Increase in the rent
correct.
based on the RGI.
Based on our
Yes.
yes. So in 2025's budget, we sure that we'll include that amount in there. But just based on our sort of flexibility with TSHC costs, we actually need to consolidate the budget with them.
Yes.
We have to include those amounts in. So, you know, the good news, which we'll talk a bit more on item 12, which talks a bit more on the separate
Yeah.
budget release.
Obviously.
Yeah. We'll get into tomorrow on that.
Okay. And, yeah, so that's when I can ask the questions there.
Okay, any questions from our colleagues? All right. Hearing none, thank you, Vince. I will now move to item number 12, which is an update or walkthrough the 2025 budget process. So Vince, over to you again.
Thank you, through the chair. The 2025 budget, city has announced that the due date of September 10th for 2025 budget submission to our seniors housing operation. The city has conveyed to TSHC that it will be a standalone budget. This will allow flexibility and autonomy after 2 years of budget consolidation with one housing corporation. Also, the city conveyed that the subsidy will be provided separately directly to TSHC. The details of this requirement will be discussed further with TSHC and the city. And below you will find sort of our timeline for the 2025 budget. So to kick off with the budget templates and has been distributed to the budget folder since June. And we're expecting to get the budget back. It's the first submission back by the end of this week. There will be some consolidation, and review, further meetings and discussions with the leadership team. We will have a tenant online budget consultation meeting, which is scheduled for August 7th and 8th for about an hour time, which we discuss a bit more on the direction, but also just sort of the prioritization, but also the input from our tenant as well. And then along with that as well, we will have the draft budget in the camera session at the AFRC on September 3rd, followed by the September 10th submission of the budget, initial budget, the first draft in the city there. Further down on the list there as well, there's quite a number of areas of other reviews and processes, including the review of the city, which takes place between October 1st and 31st, and also from the budget committee as well, culminating with a budget decision sometime closer towards the end of November. Right now, approximately around Wednesday, November 27th is our date. And then, of course, we're bringing back to the board closer towards the December date. It's still to be announced, but those are our tentative timeline, and expect that the council budget approval will be happening around similar timeline last year, which is around sometime in February. That's our expectation right now. So that's still.
When does it come to the board? Remember last year we were concerned about the delay and then we didn't get any board.
Yes, so right now, the board is expected to approve the 2025 budget on December 11th or 16th, depending on the time.
So we don't see it until December.
September, AFRCC.
So that budget draft review, that's where it comes to the board
That's committee.
or the committee of the board?
We will definitely keep regular ongoing conversations.
Whenever last, I don't know if you remember this, who was around there, but I was concerned that the board didn't get any input at all or didn't even review it until the very end. So I'm just cognizant of, I mean, I know you have your steps and your processes.
Yeah.
Just in terms of board awareness. And given that, and for this budget that will be separate, we'll be reporting separate. So this is the first time.
It's just standalone.
Right. And it's also the subsidy will be coming directly to us. So these are important steps.
But in terms of board meetings and some of the key dates that we'll discuss.
Maybe I could just add some. See that referencing, that'll be the overall view that'll be going in on that initial submission on the 10th.
Right.
But then we have another AFRC scheduled in October. We have a board meeting in October as well.
Yes.
So we can bring forward updates as well. To the
Okay.
process, and ultimately take it to the final stages as mentioned in December.
Okay.
Hopefully in alignment with the city processes to make sure we have
Yes.
the appropriate feedback loops and stuff like that, you know, in alignment. We don't have the full schedule yet, so that's why there's a little bit of fluidity potentially in there, but we have targeted in our schedule for this year a special board meeting. That's why there are two on the calendar in December,
Yeah.
to allow the time for the board to have that conversation.
So commitments being made then to get informed.
Yeah, I think it would also be prudent to, from time to time, even before the board meeting, make it a standing item on our agendas.
Yeah.
Between now and December, so we can get an update with that and how things are going, because I think it'd help the board to kind of take the temperature of the discussion, so we understand what we can expect in December.
Just a very brief comment. I think that the other question last time was what was in camera and what wasn't, and maybe just actually understanding so that we're not actually, why some, because there's a city process that has to happen before we can actually bring, because that was actually a lot of the.
I agree, and I had that public engagement piece written here, because I think this is the point, Lawrence, you had made last last time.
Yes,
which I
you did.
think was
That's right.
Quite,
Yes.
quite insightful. And I was gonna ask about the nature of the tenant online budget consultation and what format, and the 7th and 8th, I mean, what format do you anticipate that taking on, and how do you orchestrate that? And what kind of feedback would the board get from that consultation?
I guess, through the chair to the board. So when I was at Toronto Community Housing, I did have the opportunity to attend a session where the mayor did a kind of a budget consultation with tenants. And so I feel, and the consensus was it was successful. And what they did was it was more framing of what are your priorities, right? So these are the priorities that Toronto Senior sees. What do you as tenants see as those priorities if you would want things to change? So they were high level questions. They broke the tenants out into small facilitated focus groups. And so I think it was in that way that, you know, I think keeping it at that level to ask them about those priorities, what are their concerns, really, it got elicited some very good information that could help inform the budget. So I would see something similar to that.
And who would lead that?
We'll
Will it be staff?
We would, yeah. I don't think we'll get from there to that.
No. But I raise these questions because we're evolving now into more of an independent body, right? And I think there's been a certain ethereal never land about our budgeting process because it always got absorbed into the Toronto Community Council. So I think for me, process is important as much as the content. That we start engaging as a board and being fully accountable, being fully aware of the financial situation and not just assuming the city's gonna do this or TSHC is gonna do that. And I think someone will be speaking to our negotiations on our service.
Service delivery.
Service delivery agreement, thank you. SDA. Will someone be talking about?
We'll be in camera.
Okay. And, you know, as we're progressing finally down that path, then I just think it's important to start engaging with the process.
Okay, any question from our virtual participants? Yeah, I mean, I think this is the most important policy instrument that the board is engaged in on an annual basis. And so I think it's really important for the board to be kept up to date and get perhaps a bit more meaningful input before we submit the final draft or penultimate draft to the city. So we look forward to kind of getting rolling update as it were between now and when we're ready to submit. Okay, so we'll move on to, I guess that ends our public session. And I just need a motion for staff from our board to end our public session. By Linda, seconded by Brenda, all in favor? All right, so that has been approved. We're now convened as a board in camera. I'll wait a few minutes or so to our live stream. Yeah.